Hey APLANG teachers, Beth Hall here from Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, I'm going to give you 5 quick tips to help your rhetorical analysis instruction. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to stay in touch. One of the best ways to do this is by signing up for my teacher email list. During the school year, I try to send weekly or bi-weekly emails, usually with tips, tricks, video links, and other resources. The information for how to sign up is in the description box below. When you sign up, you'll also receive my 5 tips for teaching rhetorical analysis. Those tips are a little bit different from the ones I'm covering in this video. Also, please don't forget to subscribe, hit that little bell to turn the notifications on. That way you don't miss any upcoming videos. I'll be focusing primarily on teacher tip content during the summer, and then when the school year starts, I'll be back to my usual student-friendly APLANG tutorials. My first tip for teaching rhetorical analysis is to start with something fun and approachable. Last week, I posted a video all about how I use commercials to introduce rhetorical analysis. I will link that video in the description box below if you want to check it out. In that video, I mentioned using commercials. You can also use Disney songs or movie scenes. I think it's important to keep things light and engaging, something that students are familiar with, as we're introducing these concepts like the rhetorical situation and rhetorical choices. It also helps students realize that rhetorical analysis is not just something they need for the APLANG exam, it is a skill that they can use in the real world. Now, as you transition from those fun activities to some actual passages in class, I recommend keeping it exam length and approachable. So choose texts that have relatively obvious rhetorical choices. I think it also sometimes helps to choose ones that have an obvious rhetorical situation. And so for that reason, I have a couple recommendations here on the screen, but this is not an inclusive list. I could probably give you 20 or 30 titles that I like. But if we're thinking about past exam prompts, I really like the Florence Kelly prompt and the Madeline Albright prompt. One of the things that I like about those two specifically is that even though they seem like they're on the longer side for exam length is 600 to 800 words, by the way. Those two passages are also helpful for teaching students how to analyze chronologically. Not only do they have relatively obvious rhetorical choices, but they have different movements in the passage. So those are good passages for teaching students how to divide up the passage. I also really like the Rita Dove passage from the 2023 exam on the paper test. Using presidential speeches can be a way to help students see those interdisciplinary connections with history as well. So those are some basic recommendations, but there are plenty more out there. I'll be doing a video in the next couple weeks that talks about how I make a rhetorical analysis unit. So I'll go into more detail about how I pick whatever text I want to use. But I think the key here is to choose passages that have approachable rhetorical situations and approachable rhetorical choices, and also passages that are relatively short. This will help you cover it in a couple class periods if you need to, and it makes it more manageable for students as well, especially when they're first being introduced to these skills. My next tip for you is to streamline your grading process. This was something that I had to learn through trial and error throughout my teaching career. When I first started teaching, I thought that I had to assign lots of essays because that's what my high school teachers did. Now, I'm not going to lie, my students did become better writers that year, but I burnt out very quickly. And quite frankly, I did it all to myself. So now that I know that, here's what I do instead. Instead of assigning essays right away, I make sure that we do a series of small assignments first. These small assignments are more manageable for students, they're less intimidating, and they are more manageable for me. One example of a really quick assignment you can do is having students write a thesis statement. They don't have to write the rest of the essay, but it can be a great way to have them practice articulating their observations of the rhetorical situation and rhetorical choices. I like to have students use a sentence frame to do this when I introduce it, and it helps me establish what I think is a defensible thesis statement early on in the year. My students will write a thesis statement for bell work or maybe an exit ticket, and this is usually a really quick assignment, not just for them, but it's easy for me to give quick feedback on. Now you can score it however you choose to. In the beginning, I usually just give it as a completion grade. Is it defensible? Yes, you get full credit. If not, maybe half credit because you attempted it. Now, as my students get stronger at it, I might change my grading criteria slightly, but these are usually a very small point value grade in my gradebook. Something else that is a relatively small assignment is having students write a body paragraph. And I don't have them write a body paragraph for every single thing we read, but it is very helpful because if I'm able to help students understand my expectations for what a body paragraph is before they write an essay, then they're going to ultimately write a stronger essay when they have to do so. From the teacher side of things, I realized in my first couple years of teaching, when I was assigning all those essays, that I was writing the same feedback from one paragraph to the next, one paper to the next. So this is a way to see which skills your students already have and which skills they need to influence future instruction. Having students write a body paragraph helps you know what they understand about grammar in case you need to do additional grammar instruction. It also helps you realize what they're picking up in class. Now, from the student's perspective, a body paragraph is a lot less intimidating than an essay. And also, I've found that sometimes different teachers have different expectations of a body paragraph. And so, this is usually a good way for teachers to establish, hey, here's what I'm looking for in my classroom. Like, for example, in APLANG, we might expect more developed paragraphs with more analysis than what our students are used to writing in other classes. And so, this is a great way to establish those expectations. That way, students know what you're looking for when you say topic sentence, evidence, commentary, things like that. For both of these types of assignments and other short assignments, it can be helpful to have a rubric. That way, that can streamline your grading even more. As far as providing feedback, especially on the body paragraphs, I find it really helps if I have a clear objective. So, for instance, if my focus in class was rhetorically accurate verbs, then I look for those in the body paragraph. It can be really tempting to comment on everything, and that not only takes you a lot of time, but it overwhelms your students, and chances are they might not read and internalize all that feedback anyway. So think of it this way: give your students a glow and a grow. What did they do well, and what can they work on next time? Giving them 2 to 3 bullet points of feedback is much more manageable for you and for them. Now, I mentioned rhetorically accurate verbs, so let's talk about what those are and why those are helpful in your instruction. A rhetorically accurate verb is a strong verb. It's more precise, and so we want our students to start using those verbs as early on as they can. Most of our students are probably pretty familiar with the noun form or the device form of things like repetition, anecdote, juxtaposition. Now, hear me out on this. It is not wrong for students to use the noun or device form. However, as they transform into stronger writers, if they can use those rhetorically accurate verbs, it's going to help their style. So one of the things that I have found helps my students is I make sure that I emphasize those verbs from the start. This means writing those verbs on the board. This also means including those verbs in the assignment instructions if applicable. So let me give you a quick example. Last year, I introduced my sophomores to the word anecdote. Some of them had never heard of it before. So I explained what it was, and I gave them 3 or 4 other ways to say it besides anecdote. One of those was recalls a time when. So I basically just wrote anecdote on the board, and then I wrote the verbs that I wanted them to use instead. So I made sure that when they had to write about that passage, that I gave them access to those preferred phrases. And then the next time they encountered an anecdote in a different passage, I asked them, hey, does anyone remember what verb phrases we could use instead of saying uses an anecdote? And here's the thing, they remembered. So we want our students to use those strong verbs, but sometimes as teachers, we need to provide that vocabulary for them. You can also use more open-ended verbs like acknowledges, justifies, presents. I found that it helps to introduce a couple at a time to make sure that students are comfortable with them, and then try to cycle them. Make sure you try to revisit them in future passages if you can. Something else that might be kind of fun for your students is a rhetorical analysis verb sort activity. I did this last year with my students. Basically, I printed out a bunch of cards that had different verbs on them. Some of them were verbs that they knew. Others were verbs that they had not seen before, but they were verbs that I wanted them to be able to use by the end of the school year. And so I will link this activity in the description box below. But basically, it was a way for students to work in groups to kind of categorize these verbs. That way they could realize that certain verbs had different connotations, and it also expanded their vocabulary. That way they weren't tempted to say says and uses and things like that all the time. And just as a quick disclaimer, before you check out that verb activity, there are several verbs in the activity itself. You might not want to give your students all of those verbs when you do the activity. It's okay to select which ones you want to use. But the idea is to get students to realize that words have different meanings or different connotations, and we need to think about that as we're writing our essay. My next tip for you is to use sentence frames to incorporate Space Cat. If you've never heard of Space Cat, it's kind of like the new version of Soapstone. Space stands for speaker, purpose, audience, context, and exigence, basically the rhetorical situation. And then CAT is what we want students to analyze. So choices, appeals, and tone. Okay, so now let's talk about why sentence frames are helpful. I'm certainly not the first teacher to create sentence frames or mentor sentences. Some people call them sentence stems. But one of the things I realized is that some of my students were participating very well in class discussion. They had great ideas, but those ideas never made it into their paper. And in talking to those students and realizing why, it was because they didn't have the confidence to write it down. They had the ideas, but they didn't know how to say it, especially under pressure. This is where those sentence frames came in. I found that my students were able to plug in their ideas to a pre-written sentence, and that gave them the confidence that they needed to continue their paper. It also was a great way to start to incorporate some more advanced vocabulary, deeper analysis, and even grammar instruction. I have some videos on my channel for rhetorical analysis sentence frames. I also have a resource with them as well. I like to incorporate these sentence frames in instruction. So for instance, I might give students 1 or 2 sentence frame options as they're writing a thesis statement or maybe a paragraph. As students get more comfortable with these sentence frames, they tend to need them less. But it's a great way to help your novice writers, especially if rhetorical analysis is something they're really not comfortable with. My final tip is to join the APLANG teacher community. I would love to invite you to join the English Coaching Garden. That is a Facebook group that Tim Freitas from the Garden of English and I started not too long ago. We are working on growing that group, so please feel free to join that group. Make sure you answer those entry questions though before you sign up, because we do like to make sure that we are only allowing teachers to enter. So it really helps if people answer those questions as they sign up. So the English Coaching Garden is on Facebook. I'll link that in the description. We also offer teacher chat. Right now it's on Lighthall, and so I'll link that in the description box below. Teacher chat is one of my favorite things because it's kind of like a virtual PLC. We right now are meeting on the last Sunday of the month for about an hour, and during the school year, it's more of a, here's a topic, let's talk about it and share ideas. During the summer, it's a little bit more Q&A style, open-ended, but we'd love for you to join us on Teacher Chat. And also, I have an email list for teachers as well. I would love for you to consider joining that. That way I can send you information about videos, resources, and just other tips and tricks straight to your inbox. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please do me a huge favor and give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to make sure that you are subscribed. Until next time, happy teaching!